like to welcome everyone to our webinar on measuring HR's impact in their organization. And the reason why we are having this webinar is that measuring impact is the most critical factor in being competitive for either the HR Department of the Year Award or the HR Excellence Award. And yet in my 25 years of judging, I would say that's the most sticky point in HR's applications and in being judged. So what we hope to do today is, through our panelists, through our past winners and judges, that you will learn some tips and gain insights on how to be competitive for this award. And whether or not you apply, I think it's always important that we have in our minds how we could be adding value and making an impact on the organization. Our moderator today is Linda Bonaventura. Lynn is going to introduce the panelists, but I'd like to say about Lynn. Lynn has been partnering with me in the HR Department of Year Awards. Both she and I will advise applicants on how to make their applications more competitive with regard to measuring impact. And we understand it's not easy, but we could offer tips as well. And Lynn has been very active in the HR Department of Year Awards. So I'd like to turn it over to her. Lynn?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have an amazing panel for you today. Just have a great conversation about HR metrics. As Mark said, we're going to explore what the award-winning criteria is for the HR Department of the Year Awards and the Excellence Awards. But even more than that, we're going to go into what good HR metrics and evaluation looks like. And that includes storytelling, data. We'll look at a few cases from our panelists, some amazing opportunity that they've had in their careers to really do this effectively. And then at the end of the call, we'll be able to answer questions. We're going to kick off the call with one question, and at the end, we will open it up. If you have questions during the panel discussion, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll address those first at the end of the call, and then we will open it up if we have time to further questions. So we will get started. To really kind of set the context for us, we're looking for, and you can put this in the chat, one word. Okay, and we'll kind of use this throughout the themes to make sure our panelists address, what they're hearing from the audience. What does HR value look like in action in your organization? Right, one word. Right, what does that look like? What does the value look like for HR? So we'll track some of those responses throughout the call. Actionable. There we go. Thank you. Execution. Trust. So continue to put your words in. Engagement, right? We're going to refer to these throughout because I think some of these words that I'm seeing already just in the few responses that we have is really going to be fleshed out in very tactical and specific terms with our panelists. And we'll use these throughout the day. Quantifiable, productive, right? Really kind of interesting. So I appreciate keep adding those words in there. Today, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have a fantastic panel. I've been very privileged this last month to talk to them individually and then as a group. We have 4 panelists from a variety of businesses. So I'll start with Karen Clay from Johnson Controls. Karen's been with Johnson Controls International for 10 years and has been helping to transform the organization through learning, talent, organization, culture, and leadership roles. Her role is inclusive of all of that, and then working really effectively across the employee experience with leadership development, functional and product training for over 99,000 employees, channel partners, and customers. So Karen brings a wealth of experience with Johnson Controls as well as many other organizations, and she has been a judge for the HR Department of the Year Awards for several years, and a good friend and colleague. Our second panelist is Katie Petrie from American Expediting Logistics, and she's the head of human resources and has been honored with the Women in Trucking Association Award Member of the Month in May. With nearly a decade of experience in transportation and logistics, Katie blends strategic insight with people-first leadership to drive meaningful change across the organization in supply chain and logistics. And from an early career leap that took her family from Wisconsin to Missouri to leading talent strategy for 90,000 trailer fleet company, her story is grounded in resilience, vision, and passion. So I know we have some colleagues, Katie, from Missouri as well, and St. Louis, and we're very happy to welcome them to our HR department webinar today. Sarah Slate is from Medlogix. Sarah joined Medlogix as Vice President of Human Resources in August of 2020, was promoted to the Senior Vice President role following several national acquisitions and integrations. And in the role, Sarah's responsible for the management and advancement of Medlogix human resource operations and people initiatives. She works across all departments to establish human capital practices and talent acquisition, org design, performance management, comp and ben. And she has also been a previous HR Department of the Year winner, at Excellence Award, and a judge. And I apologize, Katie, you have also been a previous HR Excellence Award winner. I missed my bullet point. Excited to have David Long with us as well. David is, where David went. David was with Pinnacle. David's the HR capital executive with over 20 years of experience in Fortune 200 companies, private equity, nonprofit, and international business across a wide range of healthcare organizations. He's got a strong operational background, which we'll incorporate today in our conversation, and has created a passion for closely aligning human capital efforts around the needs of the organization. In addition to focus on individual and team development, he's successfully built a strong company culture that attracts and retains some of the best talent in the industry. David has also been a past winner, Department of the Year Award winner, and judge. So we welcome all of our panelists. I'll just give a quick introduction about myself. My name is Linda Ventura, as Mark mentioned, and I'm the president and CEO of a small consulting company called DGA Consulting. My background is in talent development, talent acquisition, organizational design, and workforce transformation. And I'm very happy to introduce our panel today. We'll get started right now with a question for Karen Clay. So Karen, you've been successfully working at Johnson Controls for 10 years, right? You've had some amazing accomplishments, and I know you're extremely analytical and data-driven. When you've successfully made HR metrics resonate with the C-suite, and I know you've turned a department into a profit center. You've had a lot of board level discussions about running your department. Tell us a little bit more about that. And then focus on the financial insights that are most compelling to the CEO, and really how did that translate to the outcomes? Let's hear a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge for a lot of HR departments, Lynn, and thank you for the question. It's, I think the first thing is you need to understand the business and how it operates. And if you don't have a background in business, if you've come from academia or another sector, it's really important to understand the company that you're working in. And the best way to do that is to get out wherever the product is delivered or the service is offered and experience that firsthand. And then the second thing I advise people to do, and you should spend as much time as you need to really understand all aspects of that. And then the second thing you should do is really spend time with the business leaders. So whoever's responsible for the profit and loss, the P&L, and that usually is a vice president or senior vice president of a division or an aspect of the service or product delivery, and spend time with that person and understand how they measure themselves, because that's how the business is run. And that's how, if there's a board involved, if there are shareholders, if it's a public company, that's how success is measured. It's through the profit and loss. And so deeply understanding what are the elements of delivering that service, what are the elements that we really talk about in our financials as we measure success, and then translate that back to how can I in HR connect to those business metrics. And usually it's not a direct connect where you can say, oh, I'm affecting, the EBIT line on the P&L. No. However, if you're doing sales training, the first time I ever did that was with sales training, Lynn, as you know. And what we did was we looked at impact of a learning initiative on sellers, and we connected it to the revenue that the sellers generated. And through a couple surveys after the learning offering, we asked them, how was the impact of the training? What did you apply on the job? And what percentage of what you applied on the job affected the deals that you closed this quarter? So we had a very specific kind of linking from the learning event to the P&L. And so that's like a best case scenario. But even if you can't go all the way to that, I think it's really important to make sure that what the executives are measuring, what the business is measuring, and you think about how whatever you're doing, whether it's learning, onboarding, hiring, any kind of initiative, how does it impact the P&L? And another thing to understand as you're talking to executives, and then I'll wrap up, is, what does the executive expect? If you're doing a program, if you're hiring, what is our expected outcome? And I think a lot of organizations don't really take the time to think about that, right? So if I'm hiring, what's the time to effectiveness, right? Through the onboarding process. Is it 90 days? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? And so when you talk to an executive and you start to show metrics from an HR standpoint, the first question you're always going to get from them is, what did you expect? What was the standard? What are you going for? What's the target? And so that's really important to understand too. And then the second question you're going to get is, well, what was the impact? And even if you haven't translated the impact all the way to the P&L, that's okay. But if you're going to run a training program or a lunch and learn where you bring 80% of the company off the job and into an event that HR is running, you need to take the time to survey and measure the impact. And I find that, sometimes we're hesitant to do that. And it's really critical that if you're going to use resources, which usually it's time is the most precious one, we should take the time to measure the impact and go from there. And then the last thing I'll say is about talking to boards, and this also applies for applying for external awards and external. It's really important when you talk to a board or talk to an external organization that you're brief and you're very high level, and you talk about what did we do, what was the impact, what was the result, and that you don't use acronyms and you really speak in very broad terms so that everyone can understand you. And that's a myth with boards of directors. They don't know companies' acronyms. You need to really be very brief and use words that everyone can understand. And so I've learned all this the hard way by making mistakes, Lynn, and getting asked the questions that I couldn't answer. And so I'm happy to share more as we go. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Karen. You've actually hit on a couple really important things here in looking at not just understanding the business, right? Asking those executives, what you said about that is, a lot of the times, especially in HR awards, right, we say, okay, what was the impact? But really starting initiatives or really beginning in the initiatives when you're first getting that buy-in with your executives or your board for the initiative to come is to say, what does success look like, right? What does it look like and how does it sound in your terms, in business terms, right? And then what would success look like for HR in this role? So those questions up front are absolutely important to really target the outcome, right? But even if you don't have those questions up front, you're already in the middle of things, I think it's important for our audience to understand it's not just the ROI, it can be the trend, right? Or the focus and the progress that they're making along the way, right? A lot of the time, Mark and I hear, hey, we're not done this initiative. I don't have a final answer for you. I don't have a final metric, but the trend is going in the right way, right? So we can anticipate that in their applications. They can say, hey, here's where we are today. We anticipate by April, if this trend continues, we'll be, at A, B, or C. So there's some really good things in there. And I think one thing that I've really respected about your career is that ability to position HR and the projects and the things that you're working on with those executives in their terms, right? And really getting the vernacular down, right, of that business. And I will say, I'm a big fan of making best friends with the CFO and with all of the financial people. Don't be shy about asking. Like, all right, what does this mean, right? Tell me a little bit more about the terms we use here. Tell me a little bit more about how the budget runs and how that impacts what we do, because they have great insight and you can really work well with that partnership. I'm also going to think about how they're measuring themselves, right, from a business standpoint, right? How are these executives and the business functions measuring themselves? What wording are they using? And then how are we step by step trying to pull that thread? It's not easy, especially in learning and development, as you mentioned, but there can be some key systems or frameworks set up that can help us at least say we're moving in the right direction, right? Any other questions or thoughts on metrics and really talking to the C-suite from the rest of our panelists? Any other comments?
I just wanted to reiterate Karen's reference to not using acronyms or actually, HR lingo in general, right? You really have to be able to talk business language so that it resonates not only with the board, but with the other leaders in the company. It's so important to keep things simple and not go down, too many details about people, right? It's not about we want to elevate it, so I think that's critical in gaining credibility with your peers and with the C-suite.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things to do, but really to ask yourself, constantly, so what? So you had 500 people show up at a lunch and learn. So what? Right? And if you're asking yourselves those questions, then it's easier for your business partners to not have to ask that question, right? You can draw them to that proactively. What's that so what factor? But I love the acronyms because I think Mark and I as well, from a judging standpoint, and Karen's been a judge for quite a while as well, we get a lot of acronyms and we're like, okay, let's translate that. What does that mean? And that doesn't necessarily mean we'll get the right translation.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. David, I'm going to turn to you on the operations side with Pinnacle. You've done some amazing things and quantified the link between turnover and clinical outcomes, which is not an easy thing to do. David walked in and really built his department, right? So I love the fact that David and I have that in common. We're both builders. So it's kind of nice to be able to do that rather than reverse engineer something you've walked into. But at the same time, actually getting to those clinical outcomes is not an easy thing. So walk us through how you measured HR's influence on patient care and the data points in operations that drove that conversation. What did you see?
Wonderful. First of all, I just want to thank you, Lynn, Mark, and Larry for inviting me and being able to be part of this great panel. Looking to share a little bit and learn a lot from everyone today. So just start off by thanking you. Yeah, and that's a great question, right? Here at Pinnacle, two of the areas that we pay most attention to is our patient care, right? We serve 35,000 patients across 9 states. And our teammate care, those that are delivering that care to those patients. And this focus makes up our annual strategy, our team's KPIs, and even our annual incentive program across our leadership team, right? How we're doing in the areas of patient care, teammate care, and company care. Company care is the financial side of things, but that comes last because if we get the teammate care right and the patient care right, the financials will come. So that's first and foremost, right? And while we focus on specific metrics in each of these 3 areas, we also like to look at the interplay between how we measure patient, teammate, and company care, right? Because oftentimes how we're doing with people health will impact our patient health. We're fortunate enough here at Pinnacle to have a business intelligence team that has a few analysts that feed information from our patient care systems, our teammate HRIS systems, our financial systems into one centralized data warehouse. We use something called Tableau. Many of you may have heard of that. And that allows us to be able to see the interplay between our people health, for instance, and our patient health, right? And how they're impacting each other. Here at Pinnacle, we created a measurement called the Talent Quality Index, or the TQI, right? Which is essentially a ranking of all of our facilities, and there's over 140 of these across the country, against certain key people metrics. We included turnover, onboarding and training compliance, and engagement scores. So we kind of force rank those three areas, and then we get an overall ranking, which is the TQI index, which kind of shows us, top to bottom, how our 140 locations are doing as it relates to overall people health. So we have that information. And then we also have a whole slew of patient outcomes, right? Clinical care outcomes. And, in our gut, we know that there are certain people metrics that can impact, drive forward or hold back these patient outcomes. Turnover and churn is one of those key impacts, right? We need to dig a little bit deeper into understanding turnover across the organization. What job roles we're seeing the greatest turnover, right? We had a lot of interest in our direct care roles, our patient care specialists, our nurses, our counselors. Which of those roles, right, was driving most of the churn or most of the turnover? We were also curious about when the turnover was occurring, right? If it was early turnover, in our mind, that points to an issue with selection or an issue with onboarding, two areas that we can control, right, that are completely within our control. Or if turnover was occurring later in the life cycle, that might point to a lack of development, promotional opportunities, or even life changes, right, for that particular teammate. We were also interested in term reason. And learned a lot, actually. We learned that don't take this at face value, because what your manager might be reporting in your HRIS system might be very different from what your employee or your teammate is saying in their exit interview, right? And it wasn't until we were able to pull these two data sets together in the data warehouse to see that they were oftentimes at odds. So being able to have this, we're able to kind of triangulate the true reason why someone was leaving. So again, we've been able to highlight the overall people health of a facility and see how it's impacting patient outcomes. What we saw was generally, the better the people health of a facility, the better the patient outcomes, right? So that pointed us in some very clear directions on how to impact overall patient care.
I'm hearing a business case for more budget, David.
Right?
Like when you're talking the way you are with the TQI and you're really relating those patient outcomes, and you can kind of pull that thread, right? It might not be a direct link, but there's those trends and those kind of indicators, those KPIs that kind of lead to that. Then it's very easy to go to your board and your executives and say, hey, listen, this is an initiative we really need to fund. Here's why, and here's the eventual impact that'll have. And I think everybody's hearing these days more about data warehouse and data analysis in HR, right? Having people that do that on your team is absolutely phenomenal. It's a great resource. A lot of us don't. But to be able to just think that way, right, and help guide the business through that, and start thinking, what is that outcome, right? What is the outcome to the patients, not just the business financials, right? Because that's all intertwined. I love the philosophy of actually the people have an impact in that. And depending on the culture of the company, that can change. Some companies are like, hey, it's all about the patient. But that thread doesn't get pulled through to the employee, vice versa. It's all about our employees, and then there's this customer care side over here. So that alignment that I'm hearing of really integrating the business to the people is very powerful. And I loved what you said. Even you also mentioned a little bit about understanding the business cycle through the turnover, but also understanding the business cycle and how it impacts the people metrics that you're seeing. Depending on what industry you're in, I know I was working in a manufacturing organization. A certain time of year, we'd have drop off an employee that was outside of our conditions, right? It had nothing to do with the company. It was just, seasonal, and they just all left. They all left town. So that impact, and we track that, it impacts, the end deliverable and the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And healthcare is a tough industry, right? I mean, very high churn, high turnover, behavioral health, addiction services, even higher. So it is something that we truly have to understand and then figure out, okay, now what are we going to do about it? That's the second part of the battle.
And I know, David, you were obviously an HR Department of the Year award winner. But you're also talking a little bit about some of the excellence, right? Like for those audience members who are in learning and development or in talent or in comp and ben, they might have a section in the excellence awards that are like, hey, we're not ready for the big HR department, right? But we can really focus in on this one area of HR and submit our application for the excellence awards. But tying that together, even in the Excellence Awards application, to some other conditions or some other functions within HR is still absolutely appropriate and even more powerful. And I love the strategy that you've taken with Pinnacle to do that.
Lynn?
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mark. I was just going to open it up.
No, I just was going to comment what David and you and others are getting to is how we in HR could be viewed as an investment rather than a cost. So the stronger we could make that connection to the business outcomes, less likely for us to be a budget cut or people cut, etc.
Absolutely. I think that is the goal of our conversation today, as well as the goal of, I think, every HR employee as we go forward, right? Especially in these days and times of cuts and things like that across the board, really, when you are completely linked to that business outcome and really show that logical pathway, it's much harder to make decisions, right? Much easier to get investment. Fantastic. Any other comments on David from our panel? Fantastic. You did a good job, David. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Some great example. Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and really looking at American Expediting. You're a champion of baseline clarity. You and I have had that conversation. We see a lot of moving baselines in our applications sometimes. It's like we have this great data, but what's the baseline, right? For our judges, we're like, well, where did you start? And then responsible data use, right? I think that's important. How do you choose which metrics to elevate? How do you balance that so it's digestible for your business leaders? And tell us a little bit about your journey here at American Expediting.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I appreciate the question. There's a lot of factors into that question, so I'm going to break it down just a little bit. Just in general, and Karen spoke about this as well, every HR initiative should always be aligned to the broader business priorities, just in general. So is your organization growing? Is your organization past that growth and their maturity level? Well, now they're stabilizing. Are they integrating their acquisitions? Like, what is the business actually trying to achieve this year? Karen mentioned this, and I thought this was so simple and so fantastic. If you are not sure where to start, spend time at the product level. Like, there's nothing that can replace boots on the ground. You have to truly understand what is the organization trying to achieve, and then spend time with its leaders as much as you can. Just how do they measure themselves? Both of those are great places to start. Also, just asking yourself questions. What are our pain points that we experience as an organization? Who is your audience? I think is another great question to answer, because every one of the business leaders, their minds are thinking about different things, right? If you're talking to finance, you're going to start talking probably about savings and about risk management. If you're talking to operations, maybe start talking about vacancy impact and what that does to the supply chain and what it does when we have interruptions, right? Start to kind of mention that. If you have a metric, tie it back to something that they're experiencing. So my whole career, right, we're always chasing HR dashboards, but really what's the so what factor? I heard somebody say earlier. So if you're talking about 56% of our employees are eligible for retirement. Okay, what are we going to do with that information? Are we going to start recruiting differently at a lower level? Are we going to implement programs for apprenticeships for different groups? But what can we do with that? Not just the metric. And then I think it's important too to think about what are the metrics that people can really elevate. Is there something that we can do with this information in the amount of time frame that we need for the year? So when talking to the board, do we need a whole quarter's worth of data for us to be able to get the funding to make the change? And where are we in this cycle? I think that helps you when you're selecting which metrics to measure. Another thing I heard you talk about was how do I balance depth and digestibility? Fantastic question. I think the simpler, the better. What is I call it the one-line insight. What's the one thing that you want people to walk away from your conversation with them? What do you want them to hear? So think about what's the narrative first, and then you back that up with supporting information. So maybe that's in an appendix, or if you're publishing metric definitions, a lot of times in our board decks, we put kind of the main information, super simple slides, and then there's a whole appendix of slides if they want to dig more into something. Be ready for that conversation, but don't try to pack all that into one discussion. I also think it's really important to just give small insights. So if I have a bar graph, just as an easy example, and you see the information spike up, right? What was that? Just give a couple of words. Just was that, did we do a reduction in force and that's why whatever happened to the organization, but just give them just a little bit of a ticker in terms of the time. Also, I do not think I can leave this conversation without talking about AI and about dashboards. Just in general, it's difficult to go to any conversation or any kind of a webinar now without talking about AI or dashboards. I love Power BI. I think it's fantastic. I think the organization is moving in that direction. It's kind of if you've not looked into Power BI, I strongly recommend it, but it's just a way to visualize kind of the data. So you're basically taking an Excel document and you're putting it into a dashboard style. I did that with HR metrics, and the business I cannot tell you the amount of times that people quote those metrics back to me, and now we're all using the same information, which is huge for us. And there are different dashboard styles, right? Our HRIS system has AI built into it now, but I decided to go into Power BI because that's where the business is. That's where we're measuring our sales. That's where we have all the leaders are using that today. So just really trying to meet people where they are.
Yeah, and that leads into kind of double checking the data, right?
Yes.
The data integrity of that, right? Making sure that you're really going through those dashboards that may be created, but really interpreting that, to your point, that spike, making sure it's accurate, right? I know earlier in my career, you walk into a business leader and you're like, here's the data, and they're like, that's not right. Like, well, hold on, let me go back and find that. So data can be complicated. I think it's getting much easier with the introduction of AI. You can even kind of get AI to give you some examples of that in Power BI, Tableau, some great tools to be able to visualize, I think, the data and be able to pull that out. One thing that you mentioned, which I love, which ties to our HR awards and our excellence awards applications, is really starting like one thing and then following up with the details. So that's good when you're presenting to an executive, a business leader, your own boss within HR. That is really important. What are we talking about? What is the impact of this? What is the one thing? And then kind of following through with all the basics. I think a lot of the times when we sort through applications as well, as HR people, we're very proud of the value we bring and some of the words that we started with: performance, engagement, execution, like all the things that we do, right, that led to this result. But really starting with the result, saying how impactful it was, star format, right? Here's the situation, the task, the action, the result, and really kind of then providing the story. Our judges get to reach out and ask further questions. So I think that's also important as we do that. A lot of the business leaders, depending on the situation that you're presenting to, and in reality, hopefully you have that chance to do that too, but really getting the bulk of the impact up front. And then digesting that and telling the story. You and I had a great conversation about storytelling as well with the data. And I think that's something that is not always easy to do. It's getting a little easier with all the tools that we have, but really trying to bring people along step by step. Here's the impact, but now let's talk about the particulars, the tactics within that. And David had mentioned a little bit of that kind of aggregate strategy, right? Putting the data points together to tell that story. Any thought or advice, from looking at your experience at American Expediting, that you'd want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, so I'll just share a little bit about it's really, really important to intimately know the talent as well, because you can report all the metrics that you want, but if there is some story that everybody in the room knows about because it was the person that sort of was the up and comer and they did great and here's why, I think it's important to call that out, because that is so much more, it resonates with people so much more. And so give them sort of the one-liner insight that I was talking about before, but then bring up those stories. I think you need to balance it between hard data and soft data. Just the anecdotal piece of that, I think, is really important as well. I'll give you another example of a metric that our board loves because of the simplicity and because of the visual indicator. So I love to use a red, yellow, green, because everybody knows what that means in terms of the direction. You can quickly look at it and know exactly what that is. And that's kind of my one line insight. And then I would back that up with information. But the metric that we use for our board that they always want this metric in every single update now, but we talk about who are our high potential employees and then what percentage of them are working on our key strategic initiatives. So it's not just, yes, we did a training, it's really more, how are we really integrating them into the business? And then it's so simple, and I think it's so meaningful as well.
And so you can track a lot of their progress with those initiatives as well. I love that. I think that's, from a talent strategy standpoint, it's so important to make sure that, and a lot of times companies miss it, right? Oh, we're just going to help our high performers. But are they working on the most critical projects where they're getting that experience and they're also contributing? And then how do you measure that, right?
How do you measure that? Yeah.
How do you measure that? Fantastic. Katie, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to move on to Sarah, because Sarah's got a really interesting story for us as well about a pay for performance model. So working at MedLogic, she's generated impressive ROI. And Sarah, I want to understand how you built the executive confidence to move to that framework. Because that's not something that we hear about every day. We're hearing about it more in healthcare, obviously, but tell us a little bit about the pay for performance module metrics and your story about kind of that transition to that model.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks, Mark, for having me. So when you say, like, how did I transition to the model? I really didn't. When I was brought on board, it was a major initiative which was handed to me, and I was happy to receive. It was something I had been brought in by the private equity company, right, to really mature the HR function. It had previously been with one leader for 25 years plus, viewed as administrative, right, and reactive. So with the infusion of capital with a new private equity company, it was really one of their initiatives to bring the function itself to a new level. So when I came on board with the new COO, we knew that one of the things we had to wrap our brains around was kind of performance. Like, what are people doing? How do we get them, how do we see what people are doing? And a great way to do that is to establish these programs, right? Pay for performance is rewarding people who aren't in sales that have commission programs, right? They're not, you can reward people for performance with spot bonuses, which are typically not rooted in metrics, right? Spot bonuses are like, oh, we finished the project, great job, here's a couple $1,000, right? And it's like, okay. So pay for performance programs are, I think, threefold, right? So you're going to address the revenue generating production of a department. 2, you're going to address your problem areas with these programs. And then 3, the other thing is you're going to, when you roll these programs out, underperformance is going to be highlighted immediately. So there's kind of a dual benefit to this. And for some of the programs that we did pay for performance, we also layered in a performance management program to go along with it. But So the way you want to start is really looking at your problem areas and your revenue generating areas, right? And you want to try to look at what metrics you have available to you already, and I'll use two examples. One of the easiest lifts was customer service. And for customer service, our impetus was to meet our new client SLAs. Okay. So we had very large client onboardings with really stringent SLAs. So we kind of backed their productivity into the SLAs to make sure that we were meeting and exceeding these SLAs. So we established a call per hour metric, and then which was very easily defined from the operating unit. So you want to start with something that you can pull easily. And then we established, where we need it to be to make the SLA per agent. And then you layer in the bonus programs, right? So if you're 10% above that benchmark, you get X amount added to your hourly rate. If you're 20% over that benchmark, then you get XY% over that hourly rate. And typically it goes up to 3 tiers so that we are ensured that we're making that SLA, right? So again, we are bringing in the business requirement first, and then we're establishing the people expectations to satisfy that business requirement.
I'm also hearing one thing that you mentioned, and although it's pay for performance, which many of our audience might not necessarily have that ability to do in their roles, but the performance component, right? The fact that you're associating pay or reward or recognition to it is important. But I'm also hearing the way you set that up was looking at the SLAs, but the leading indicator, what is going to make us, what are the criteria that's going to help us make that SLA? Or the lagging indicator, the area of issue or problem that we need to solve. And I think when you talk about the pay for performance model, those two things are really powerful metrics that we did a lot. Mark and I did a lot of coaching last year about helping our applicants think about. We all tend to kind of go with the leading indicators, right? We've done this and we've increased that. But the lagging indicators indicate the areas of problems to be solved, right? And it sounds like in your pay for performance model, you kind of looked at both. What are we pushing? What are we pulling? What's the balance of those metrics? Because we all have them.
What are we helping?
What are we helping? Yeah. And sometimes that's, looking at the lagging indicators and saying, hey, listen, we still didn't meet our goal, but we've improved that area, that problem issue by 5% or whatever it is, or we've increased this. We're still on trend to continue that. But we have to solve the lagging indicator. Now, on the other side, we do have some leading indicators. We're already, above mark on these things. And really looking at it kind of as a push and pull lever when you look at your metrics for anything within HR, but really kind of having that mindset that you've instilled with pay for performance.
Right. And it doesn't have to be a productivity role, like a role that's repeatable. So I'll just give you 2 other examples quickly. We have what are called, contract negotiators. So in that case, we would use, a percentage of what they negotiated, right? So it's a monetary amount. It's not necessarily a calls per hour, which would be applicable to the customer service agent. In another case, we have nurse case managers who travel the country and see patients. Well, what can we measure them on? So in that case, we measured unbilled time, right? A part of their job is to get the reports into the system and send it out to invoicing, right? So you have to be creative. This is not a one size fits all. And it's not necessarily someone in a production role, again, with a repeatable action that they do over and over again. So there's all types of ways to look at a pay for performance program and utilize it. And the really great things about these programs is once you even start just talking about it and the team gets wind that we're going to start measuring you on a particular unit, or a metric rather, you're going to see an immediate lift just by talking about the that we're going to start measuring this. Like it's really exciting to see the initial lift once they're being built out, and then also once they're rolled out. It's pretty impressive.
I loved what you said as well about, we're looking at time, right? The time on the job or the time not billed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then translating that into a number, right? What is, like, I work with a law firm and everything's billable hours, right? So we look at their non-billable hours, like that mentality around, let's look at just the metric that we receive is, hey, they're working this much or they're, this many hours. But how do you translate that to the average cost per hour for that range of employee to get to the end number, and making those steps that I think Karen mentioned it earlier, looking at that ROI at the end, but taking those steps to kind of translate and play with that data. What is the cost of that? And that cost number could actually mean more to your executive team or your HR leader than here's how many hours we spent, right? Or here's how many hours are unbillable, etc. But really kind of pulling those threads through that. So I think we can learn a lot from thinking about a pay for performance model, but really kind of thinking about the methodology and the thought process that you followed very specifically for your company. But when we're talking about metrics in general in HR, having that thought, right? What is the hourly rate for that group of employees, right? On average, how much money and time did that take? What does that mean to the bottom line? What aren't they doing, and how much is that going to cost, right? Should they be doing something else?
I'll just add to that. I love this discussion because what you measure is so important. And then a lot of times I see organizations, they do performance reviews, and it's either, they put people in different categories, the 9-box or whatever it looks like, right? And you've got your lower performers and your higher performers, and then it stops. And I'm like, no, one step further, right? If you have these low performers, are we putting them on performance improvement plans, right? Coach up or coach out. And when you have these high performers, what are we doing with those folks to engage them and to really keep them learning and growing in their career? So love that the business requirements come first, and then really it's what do we do with these people once we have them appropriately in the right categories.
Yeah.
And Lynn,
Yeah, and have we ever measured cost on the non-performers, right? What's the cost of keeping a non-performer, and sharing that information with the manager, right?
Lynn, Alan Dean has a question about, do you connect the dots between culture and pay for performance?
Love that. Sarah, you want to take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear it. Mark, you broke up.
Connecting the dots between culture and pay for performance.
Oh, it's great because it's such a super way to get people excited, right? I mean, not only is one very basic element of pay for performance is transparency into production, right? So you're going to communicate out weekly, bi-weekly, some are quarterly, some are annual. Well, annual is just your annual review, which hopefully has metrics built into that as well. But no, I mean, it's like I said, once you even talk to your team about this is what we're going to begin to do, you're going to see an immediate lift. People get excited. It's recognition. It's money that they could potentially earn. And it shows them that people are looking at what they're doing. So culturally speaking, we see a lot of excitement around these programs.
Yeah, and Sarah, just to add, I mean, certainly with the culture, right, if you have defined leadership behaviors and expectations that are, represent the culture, that those behaviors can also be incorporated into what you're measuring in any model, right? Pay for performance or performance management or otherwise. So I think, but the key is, in your example is a great one. If you have those standards of leadership behavior or even values, but you're not holding leaders accountable through a performance management system or a paper performance system, they're just worth the paper they're printed on. And so to connect the dots, for Alan's question, to connect the dots between culture and pay for performance, you have to have a standard and enforce it, right? When it comes to high and low.
It's accountability system for the manager as well.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that creates the autonomy across the organization, right? There's very clear boundaries and very clear achievements that need to be made, which then kind of helps the culture. It's like, hey, we have a common language. We always go back to, this is our anchor. And let's talk about, our goals that are obviously aligned to the business.
And managers can assess against that. Many managers can assess against that same standard, and they are owning that decision process, right? Which is great.
Yeah, just to add to that, great question, right? Connecting the culture to output. Because a lot of companies just measure the outcome, the output, right? What we accomplished. They forget about how we got there. And if someone's climbing up the back of 10 other people to get it done, maybe that shouldn't be rewarded in the same way as someone who takes a different approach, right? So tying in core values, right, to projects and to performance management. Again, I think the how is just as important as what we accomplish.
I love that, David. I always used to talk to my team, how many body bags are in the hallway?
Yeah, right.
Right. It's great to have a talent metric, but let's talk about, and to Katie's point earlier as well, like when you're looking at your talent, like know the people, right? Know the stories. Just because the metrics here doesn't mean we got there the right way. And then, looking at Sarah's model is a great way to have transparency around that. Right.
This is Mark. Can I add a few comments?
Yes, and then we're going to move on to Q&A real quick because I know we're running out of time.
I just want to make some overall comments, having judged for, like I said, for all these years. First off, a lot of times we focus on, and we do focus on the present, but think about your HR strategy and where the company is moving toward. And so if the company is going to be shifting to a necessity to have a different culture, different type of skill set, et cetera, then we could be measuring those things, being ahead of the curve, not just in the current state. That's one of the things I want to mention. The second thing is that we talk about results. So we may talk about a measure, but what's helpful for the judges is also to see trends. So if you say we got an engagement score of 87%, and it may sound good, but we don't know whether the previous year's was 97 and now is 87. So we want to know what's the trend, and if there's benchmarks that would help as well. We also recognize that it's not always easy to measure outcomes, and so we, as Sarah put it, we need to be creative. And so we could look at an initiative that you've done and what was measures before versus after. So if there's a different turnover rate or net promoter score or whatever it might be, you can look at it before versus after. We may have to get into qualitative measures, not just quantitative. And I know it's hard, we talk about Kirkpatrick's model where we look at measuring performance, but we may not have that. So we may ask managers to rate, and I know it's loose, so to speak, but ask them, and how much do you see the performance of your employees as a result of this program? Has it improved? And it may not be the most scientific method, but at least it's an attempt to try to measure impact of an organization. Put yourself in the shoes of the executive. So look at what are the metrics that really matter. What are the important things that they want to focus on? And we already talked about talking their language. And I tell people to look at, I give them scenarios to think about. So imagine, and this is the biggest thing that we have in applications, is HR people, we are very proud of what we do. But to executives, it looks like we're just focusing on being busy. And so they want to know, did you move the needle? What's the so what? The impact. That's really the most important thing that they want to be thinking about. I'll stop there because I want to have time for other people as well. But those are things to be thinking about. And by the way, in the chat is, in the very beginning, is the email address of both Lynn and myself if you have follow-up questions to ask us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. We're going to open it up for the next few minutes for Q&A. Before we do that, I just want to let you know that the HR award applications are now open through October 2nd. You can apply on https://hrawards.org/apply. So that's the website if you haven't done so already or you're thinking about that. And then, as I said, Mark and I are available as you go through that process to ask any questions. Any other questions, Linda? Do you want to open it up for? I haven't seen a whole lot in the chat, but we're happy to take a few minutes and follow up with any live questions that we have.
While we're waiting, I'll point out one example that one applicant that won the award. We talk about, for instance, one metric is time to fill, but they made a case that they didn't want to be measuring how quick we fill a job. They said that we really want to get the right person in the job. Someone in the chat said, you just want to fill a position with a body. You want the right person. I think it was Michael that said that. And so they looked at other measures rather than just time to fill. And so as a judge, especially when we do interviews, we're very interested in the thought process that went into why you measure what you measure. And that's really important to us, rather than just going for the most quick thing to measure.
Yeah, so do you look at, as you're looking at the metrics of the companies that are presenting for this award, do you look at if they're defining as an organization how they drive human performance? What's the ingredients that are essential in that organization to bring about human performance? Do they define it? Are you looking for that type of clarity from the organization?
I'm gonna ask Karen.
Yeah, happy to.
That question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, Alan, I think that's really ideal. However, we're dealing with organizations who are, applying for these awards, and they are not always giving us the total picture. And so really, before we're worried about some of the more sophisticated elements of the program and of the metrics, we really just want a complete story. Why did you do what the program you did? What was it? And what was the impact? Like, start there and give us metrics, right, that led you to determine why this initiative was important, metrics around what you did, metrics around impact. I think if everyone could do that, kind of that's the standard of a complete application. For organizations that are more sophisticated and have Power BI or use lean methodologies where they're tracking, right, what the standard is and the variance to the standard, or using a red, yellow, green, like Katie suggested in her organization, I think where you have practices that are above kind of the standard, we'd love to hear about it and include all the data and tell us how you got there. But as a judge now for the last 4 years in the talent category, I'm really just looking for, give me a complete package of what's going on in your organization. Give me the key metrics I need to know to understand how big are you, what problems are you solving? Is it turnover? Is it, is it performance? And then tell me what you did and use metrics to tell that story. I think that's really, if everyone could do that, then we could fairly assess every applicant equally, right? And that's the goal here. And that's one of the reasons why we're all here today. Lynn, back to you.
Thanks, Karen. No, I appreciate that. I know Michael has a question. I did just want to let everybody know, because I know we're getting close to time. I put in a job aid that we created last year for our applicants into the chat. It's called Enhancing Your HR Excellence Award metrics. So that's just a free job aid we thought we'd include. It's got some great tips and techniques in there. And then, with the help of ChatGPT, we added some layers to it. So feel free to use that as you work on your applications. Michael, I want to turn it back to you for your question.
All right. Well, thank you. I just have a couple comments. So when I think about measuring impact, I think about training managers on employment law, not that they need to be experts in it, but them having a baseline understanding. When there's a red flag, they know to call. When I think about measuring impact, you need to look at, the reduction in charges and lawsuits. And the goal of HR is to minimize legal risk. So I think from my perspective, I really don't have a question. I just throw that out there for everyone to really think about ways that we can improve that.
Love that, Michael. Thank you. That kind of rounds out the the HR component too. I know it's easier for us to talk about talent or learning and things like that, comp and ben with our pay for performance model. But I think you bring up a great point. There's some really good statistics and ideas there on the legal side of it as well, and the risk management with HR, and that's absolutely alive and real and part of the purpose, right? That's what comes down to some of our lagging indicators, right? We have prevented A, B, or C because of whatever initiative or actions that HR has taken. So it's not always a leading indicator that says, hey, we've accomplished this. It's like, no, we've prevented that. Right. And sometimes thinking of it inside out. Legal aspects and employee relations are a great way to do that and think about that thought process, a little bit different than the leading ones.
And Michael, it is, you're making, and we all should be thinking this way, making the business case why HR should be kept in the organization, or why we add value, this business case.
Right, yeah.
Then can you speak to which companies are eligible to apply for this award and who you're really targeted at focusing?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Mark, why don't you answer that question?
Well, so the geographic region is the greater, the Delaware Valley. I like to call it the Mid-Atlantic because it is virtual, but we do have a limitation as to how far away it would be. So Missouri, Katie, would not be eligible. It is the Delaware region. But, if you're not 100% sure, apply, and then we could, or at least raise that question, and then we could answer that.
And Mark, what about companies that are headquartered in the Delaware Valley, but then obviously have locations all over the place?
Had that before. We've had applicants where their HR department or the headquarters of the company is in our area, even though they're international or elsewhere. But absolutely, they should apply for this award, whether it's the Excellence Award or the HR Department Year Award. The only restriction we, other than geography, is that if you won last year in that award, and this probably needs to be stated more clearly, you have to skip a year. You don't apply the next year.
For HR department, not excellence, correct?
That's a good question. I think it's also, we'll talk about that. I think it's also for Excellence Award too.
Okay.
And if you do reapply, we want to know, what did you do differently since the last time?
Yeah, that's a great point. I can see the methodology in the rationale behind that skip year, right? It's easy to get a two-time winner when you've had the momentum of the first year, right? So what did you do different?
Other applicants to have a chance to win too.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, to my panel and to Mark, thank you all for the preparation that went into today. You've been absolutely amazing. It's been a privilege working with all of you. And to our audience, thank you for joining and hanging on here for a few more extra minutes. As we said, questions, feel free to contact Mark or I, and we hope to see more applications pouring in. And if not, and you're not ready to apply, then just start using this information on a day-to-day basis. Hopefully we've spurred some thought and discussion for all of you to learn from. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Linda, as well.